The first sound was not the wind. It was a woman's hammer striking rusted iron before sunrise. The sharp blows rolled across the empty hills of eastern Washington. Every ranch hand on the trail turned their heads. They expected to find a man repairing a wagon before winter closed the roads. Instead, they found a widow tearing one apart. Her name was Ingrid Halvorsen, 34 years old, Norwegian, alone. 3 years earlier, her husband had walked into a blizzard and never walked out. Last winter, she had buried her youngest daughter in frozen ground. Now, on a lonely rise above the grasslands, she stood beside an abandoned sheep wagon that had not moved in years. The wheels were gone, the roof sagged, half the boards had already begun to rot. Yet every nail she pulled carried the same quiet purpose. She was not saving the wagon. She was preparing it to save the 2 children she had left. Below the ridge, 3 women on horseback slowed to watch. One of them laughed. The sound carried up the hill like a slap. Ingrid did not look down. If you have ever wondered how a mother kept her children alive, when winter showed no mercy, and no man came to help, stay with this story. What this Norwegian widow built on, that hill left the whole valley silent, before it forced them to question everything they thought they knew about surviving the frontier, and everything they thought they knew about her. The hammer came down again, iron on iron, a sound too sharp for the hour, too stubborn for a woman working alone, before the sun had cleared the ridge. Ingrid Halvorsen wiped her forehead with the back of her wrist. The wrist was cracked from cold. The cold was only September, and already the mornings tasted like metal. She struck the nail again. It bent. She struck it once more. It gave. One board pulled free, then another. She dropped them into the pile at her feet and did not look up. She could feel them watching. 3 riders, down on the trail, slowed to a walk the way people slow when they see something they cannot make sense of. She kept working, because if she looked up, she would have to see their faces, and their faces would be smiling. And a smile from those women was not kindness. It was a knife wearing a bonnet. Well now, Cordelia Whitfield's voice. Ingrid did not need to turn. Would you look at that? Ingrid pulled another nail. Girls, would you look at that? Prudence Callahan laughed first. It was always Prudence who laughed first. A short, clipped laugh, the kind a hen makes when it is startled. Then Elsie Brennan. Softer, almost apologetic. Elsie was the youngest of the 3, and she still remembered how to be ashamed. Cordelia was not ashamed of anything. Ingrid, honey, that word. What in the good Lord's name are you doing to that poor old wagon? Ingrid set the hammer down. Slowly, she turned. She looked down the slope at the 3 horses, and the 3 women, and the 3 sets of gloves that had never held a hammer in their lives. Building a house. Silence. Then Cordelia laughed. A real laugh this time, the kind that came from her belly. A house. Yes. Out of that. Yes. Prudence covered her mouth. Elsie looked at the ground. Sweetheart. Cordelia leaned forward on her saddle horn. That is a sheep wagon. That has not moved in 10 years. That is not a house. That is kindling waiting for a match. Ingrid picked up the hammer. Then it will be a warm match. She turned back to the wagon. The 3 women waited. For what, they did not know. Maybe an explanation. Maybe an apology. Maybe the woman would break down and admit she was a widow with no husband and no money and no sense. She gave them none of it. Cordelia clicked her tongue. Her horse moved. The other 2 followed. The laughter carried up the hill for a long time after they were gone. Ingrid drove the next nail out with 3 clean strikes. She did not cry until the sound of the hooves was completely gone. The wagon had been Eric's. She had not known that yet. Not on that first morning. That would come later. But something in her had known. Something in the way her hand rested on the frame. The way the grain of the wood felt familiar under her palm. The way the wagon itself seemed to lean toward her. The way a dog leans toward the person it has been waiting for. She did not think about it. She could not afford to think about it. She could only afford to work, because winter was coming. And she had already buried one child in this country, and she was not going to bury another. 6 months earlier, the rented cabin, the one at the bottom of the valley, the one with the crooked chimney, and the door that never closed right. March, late March, the kind of March that pretends to be spring for one afternoon, and then remembers what it is. Solveig was 2. Solveig had her father's eyes, blue like the fjord in summer, blue like a piece of the old country had come across the ocean and settled into a baby's face. Solveig was warm in Ingrid's arms. Then she was warmer. Then she was too warm. Then she was cold. It happened in one night. The fever came at dusk. The cough came at midnight. By dawn, the small chest under Ingrid's hand had gone still. Ingrid did not scream. She did not cry. She held her daughter against her heart for 6 hours before she let anyone touch her. When the doctor finally came, he looked at the ice on the inside of the walls. He looked at the frost in the corners of the ceiling. He looked at Lars in the next bed, wheezing. He looked at Astrid, huddled by the stove, her lips the color of a bruise. He turned to Ingrid. He was an old man. He had delivered babies in this valley for 30 years. He had told other mothers hard things before. He did not soften it. Mrs. Halvorsen, if you spend another winter in this house, the other 2 will not survive. Ingrid looked at him. She did not blink. I know. He waited for her to break. She did not break. She walked out of the cabin. She walked past the frozen pump. She walked past the woodpile that had not been enough. She walked into the field behind the house, and she stood in the mud, and she looked up at the pale gray sky, and she made a promise to her daughter. Out loud. Solveig. The wind took the name and carried it away. Solveig, do you hear me? I will not lose them. Do you hear me? I will not. She did not cry. She had cried enough for one lifetime that morning. She walked back into the cabin. She picked up the broom. She swept the floor. She made bread. And she began to think. The old country came back to her that spring. Not all at once. In pieces. The way memory returns, when you finally have a reason to remember. She was 7 years old. She was in a village in the Gudbrandsdalen Valley. She was walking behind her grandmother in the snow. Bestemor Sigrid. Sigrid was small. Sigrid was bent. Sigrid had hands like tree roots and eyes the color of river ice. She wore 3 shawls in winter and 1 in summer, and she smelled like wool and juniper smoke. Come, little one. They were walking to the shepherd's hut, the one on the ridge above the village, the one the men laughed at because it was old and low and looked more like a hill than a building. Inside the hut it was warm, not fire warm, different, a gentler warmth, a warmth that lived in the walls themselves. Sigrid pressed the child's small hand against the inner wall. Feel. It is warm, Bestemor. Yes. Where is the fire? Sigrid smiled. She had 1 tooth missing on the top, and it made her smile look like a secret. There is no fire, little Ingrid. But it is warm. Yes. How? Sigrid took the child's hand and placed it flat against the wall again. She held it there for a long moment. Men build houses with fire, little one. Women build houses with patience. Ingrid had not understood. Not that day. Not for many years. She understood now. The general store smelled like flour and tobacco and old wood. Ingrid stood at the counter. Astrid held her left hand. Lars held the hem of her skirt. Mr. Halloran, the storekeeper, was a decent man. He was scratching numbers on a scrap of paper and frowning. Raw wool. Yes. How much? All of it. Mr. Halloran looked up. Ma'am, that is greasy wool. That is the kind nobody wants. May I ask what you want it for? Ingrid opened her small leather purse. She counted out the coins. She placed them on the counter in a neat stack. No, Mr. Halloran, you may not. He looked at the coins. He looked at the widow. He looked at the 2 thin children holding on to her. He nodded. Yes, ma'am. The bell above the door rang. Cordelia Whitfield walked in. Cordelia was wearing her Sunday hat. It was Tuesday. Cordelia always wore her Sunday hat when she came to town. It was her way of reminding everyone who her husband was. Her husband was Josiah Whitfield, and Josiah Whitfield owned most of what a person could see from the church steeple. Cordelia saw the coins on the counter. She saw the wool bundles behind Mr. Halloran. She smiled. Ingrid, dear, what in heaven's name? Ingrid did not turn. Are you buying all that filthy wool? Yes. Whatever for? Ingrid handed the second bundle to Astrid. The girl took it. It was almost bigger than she was. She held it anyway. For my house. Cordelia laughed. It was the same laugh from the hilltop. Oh, my dear. My poor, dear widow. Are you planning to turn yourself into a sheep? Ingrid picked up the last bundle. She turned to face Cordelia for the first time. She did not smile. She did not frown. Her face was as still as the winter lake in the old country. Mrs. Whitfield, you have never touched a piece of raw wool in your life. Have you? Cordelia blinked. Beg pardon? You have never touched it. You have never carded it. You have never spun it. You have never washed the lanolin from your hands after a long day of it. I do not see what that has to do with, so you do not know what it does. Ingrid walked to the door. Lars scurried ahead to hold it open. 7 years old, and he had already learned to hold doors for his mother, when men refused to. She stopped in the doorway. She looked back once. But you will. The bell rang. The door closed. Cordelia stood in the store, with her mouth slightly open. Mr. Halloran, who had been pretending not to listen, allowed himself the smallest smile. The hill above the grasslands was quiet that afternoon. Only the sound of wool being packed into wood. Only the sound of 2 children handing pieces up to their mother. Only the sound of the wind, learning for the first time that this wagon was no longer easy to enter. Ingrid worked from sunrise to dusk, then from dusk to lantern light, then from lantern light to sleep. Then, at sunrise, she started again. Astrid was 11. Astrid did not complain. Astrid had her father's steady eyes and her mother's steady hands. She learned to card the coarse wool with her small fingers until her palms turned red. She learned to press it into the spaces between the wooden ribs until every hollow was full. She learned in silence, because Astrid remembered. Astrid remembered the winter Solveig died. Astrid remembered holding the baby's hand and singing to her in Norwegian. Astrid remembered the moment her mother came out of the room with empty arms. She was not going to complain about grief. Lars was different. Lars carried stones. He carried them one at a time, from the creek to the pit his mother had dug at the foot of the hill. Mama. Yes, Lars. Why do we need so many stones? To keep the food cold, my love. Oh, he carried another stone. Mama. Yes. Papa knew about stones, right? Ingrid stopped hammering. She did not turn. Yes, he knew. Did he build things with stones? Sometimes. In the old country. Sometimes. She struck the nail again, harder than she meant to. Lars did not ask more. He never asked more when she struck the nail like that. Even at 7, he knew. He carried another stone. The autumn wind picked up. Ingrid worked faster. The frost was already visible on the north face of the ridge in the mornings. She dried strips of venison on wooden racks behind the wagon. The neighbor to the south had shot a deer and given her the parts he did not want. She had taken them without shame. Shame was a luxury for women whose children were fed. She salted trout from the creek. She braided them together by their tails and hung them from the eaves. She dug up the last of the wild carrots and the wild onions from the meadow. She pulled her father-in-law's old copper kettle from a crate and set it by the small iron stove she had bought with the last of Eric's savings. She had waited 3 years to spend those savings. She had known, somehow, that there would be a moment when she would need them. This was the moment. Astrid learned to smoke fish. Lars learned to lay stones in a spiral pattern along the cellar wall the way his mother showed him. The days grew shorter. The wagon began to change. It was on the 14th day that she found the Bible. She had been prying up the rotted floorboards near the back wall. She wanted to reinforce the base with fresh planks before the snow came. Under the third board, wrapped in a piece of oiled canvas, was something small and rectangular and dark. Ingrid froze. She knew that shape. She had wrapped things in oiled canvas herself. It was how her mother had taught her to keep books safe on a long journey. It was how Eric had wrapped the Bible she had given him for their wedding. She reached down slowly. Her hand did not want to move. Her hand knew before her mind did. She lifted the bundle out. She unwrapped it on her lap. The Bible was small, black leather, the corners worn soft, the gold letters on the cover almost gone. Her hand was shaking now. She could not stop it. She opened the front cover. Inside, on the flyleaf in Eric's handwriting, Ingrid Halvorsen, 1881. The year he disappeared. The year he walked into the blizzard and never walked out. She turned the page. There was more writing. Eric had been writing in the flyleaf. Eric, who had barely finished his letters in Norwegian, had been practicing his English. The handwriting was careful, the lines uneven, the words spelled the way a Norwegian would spell them if he was learning. She read them once. She read them twice. On the third time, her hand pressed against her mouth to hold the sound inside. For Ingrid, if one day you find this, please know, I love you more than my own life. If I do not come home, do not wait. Live for the children. Live for yourself. The wagon is yours. It was always for you. Eric. She sat on the floor of the wagon for a long time. The light through the doorway changed color. It went from white to gold to red. The shadows crawled across the floor. She did not move. He had known. 3 years ago. Before the blizzard. Before he disappeared. He had bought this wagon and hidden it here on this hill on land that would later belong to Josiah Whitfield. He had wrapped his Bible in oiled canvas and put it under the floor. He had known. Ingrid pressed her forehead against the cover of the Bible. She did not sob. She did not wail. She made no sound at all. The tears came anyway. They came slowly, one at a time, the way tears come when they have been waiting for 3 years for permission to fall. She whispered his name. Eric. Astrid found her there at dusk. The girl climbed the steps carefully. She was carrying a tin cup of water. She stopped when she saw her mother sitting on the floor, with the small black book in her lap. She saw the tears. She saw the writing on the cover. She did not ask. She set the cup of water down. She sat on the floor beside her mother. She put her head against her mother's arm. They sat like that until the light was gone. Then Ingrid spoke. Astrid, your papa knew. Knew what? That we would come here. That we would find this. Astrid was quiet for a moment. Then, in Norwegian, so soft it was almost a breath. Han er hos oss. He is with us. Ingrid closed her eyes. She held her daughter's small hand. And for the first time in 3 years, she believed that it might be true. The pastor came on a Sunday. His name was Elias Brandt. He was old and lean, and his coat was too big for him, because it had once belonged to a man who was no longer thin. His eyes were pale blue, and tired and kind. He rode up the hill without hurrying. Pastor, Mrs. Halvorsen, would you like some tea? I would like that very much. She invited him inside. The wagon was still unfinished. But there was a wooden crate for a chair, and a folded blanket to sit on, and Ingrid was a Norwegian woman, and no visitor to her home would go without tea. Elias Brandt did not preach. He did not quote scripture. He did not ask her about her soul. He drank his tea. Then he spoke. Mrs. Halvorsen, I have been a pastor for 41 years. In that time, I have watched many people wait for a miracle. Sometimes God sends one, but most of the time he does not. Ingrid held her cup. Most of the time he sends work. He looked at her. He sends hands that know how to hold a hammer. He sends a memory of a grandmother in an old country. He sends a wagon left behind by a husband who loved his wife enough to prepare for his own death. Ingrid's hand tightened on the cup. He sends the work, Mrs. Halvorsen, and he waits to see who will do it. The old pastor stood up. He put on his hat. He walked to the door. He turned back once. You are doing the work. He walked down the hill. He mounted his horse. He rode away. Ingrid stood in the doorway of the wagon and watched him go. The sky behind him was the color of the fjord at dusk. She held her cup of tea until it went cold. Then she went back inside and picked up her hammer. That night, after the children were asleep on the pallet in the corner, Ingrid sat by the small stove with the Bible open on her lap. She read the flyleaf again. If I do not come home, do not wait. Live. She had waited. She had waited 3 years. She had waited in that leaking cabin. She had waited through the winter that had taken Solveig. She had waited for someone to come and tell her what to do. No one had come, and then, somehow, she had stopped waiting. Ingrid closed the Bible. She held it against her chest. Outside, the first frost of the season was settling on the grass. Ingrid whispered to the darkness, Eric, I am doing the work. The stove crackled. The children slept. The wagon held. And somewhere in the hills to the north, the first snow was already forming in a cloud that had not yet crossed the ridge. It would come soon. But this time, when it came, Ingrid Halvorsen would be ready. The wool went in, handful by handful, layer by layer, between every rib of the wagon, behind every board, into every space where the wind might one day try to slip through. Ingrid's fingers cracked open at the knuckles. She wrapped them in strips of muslin and kept working. The lanolin from the raw wool worked into the cracks, stung first, then healed. The old shepherds had known that too. Astrid learned to sew felt. The girl sat cross-legged on the wagon floor, with a needle almost too big for her hand. She stitched strips of dense wool felt into long ropes. Lars stacked stones in the cellar. Down, down, down. 12 feet by 10 feet by 6 feet deep. His arms shook by the end of every day. He never asked to stop. The first visitor came on a Tuesday. She was on horseback. She rode alone. Ingrid heard the hooves and did not turn around. It was not Cordelia. The horse stopped. The rider dismounted. Boots hit the dirt. Slow. Careful. Mrs. Halvorsen. A man's voice. Ingrid turned. Josiah Whitfield. He was tall, broad, 50 years old, and moving like a man who had never been told no. He wore a dark coat and a wide-brimmed hat, and his boots were clean because his boots were always clean. He was not smiling, but he was not sneering either. Ingrid set down the hammer. She wiped her hand on her apron. She waited. He looked at the wagon. He looked at the cellar hole. He looked at the neat piles of dried meat under the canvas. He looked at her. I did not know you were still up here. I have been up here for 6 weeks. I did not know. That is not my problem, Mr. Whitfield. His jaw moved. He was not used to being spoken to that way, especially not by a widow, especially not by a Norwegian widow with wool in her hair. He reached into his coat. He pulled out a folded piece of paper. Mrs. Halvorsen, this hill is my land. Silence. I bought it in 1879, from a Mr. Ackerman, before your husband ever set foot in this county. Ingrid did not blink. The deed is in Spokane. He held out the paper. She did not take it. This is a notice. You have 2 weeks to vacate. The wind moved across the ridge, picked up a strand of Ingrid's hair. It laid it back down. She looked at him. She did not look at the paper. Mr. Whitfield, do you have a mother? He blinked. Beg pardon. A mother. Is she living? She is not. She died when I was 12. In the winter or the summer? Silence. Winter. Was it cold in the house? Josiah Whitfield stood there for a long moment. His hands still held out. The paper still between them. The 2 weeks still unspoken. He looked at the wagon. He looked at Astrid inside, watching him through the doorway. He looked at Lars, small and dirty, standing waist deep in the cellar hole, with a stone in his arms. His jaw worked again. His eyes changed. Not soft, not warm, but something moved behind them. Some old thing. Some memory he had not let himself touch in 40 years. He lowered the paper. He did not put it away. But he did not give it to her. 2 weeks. He turned. He mounted his horse. He rode down the hill. Ingrid stood there for a long time. Astrid came to the doorway. More. Who was he? The man who owns this hill. Is he going to make us leave? Ingrid picked up the hammer. He is going to try. That night, Ingrid could not sleep. She lay on the pallet with Lars against her chest, and Astrid tucked against her back. The children slept. 2 weeks. She had 6 weeks of work left. At least. She did not have 2 weeks. She did not have money. She did not have a lawyer. She did not have a husband to stand at the door and stare a man like Josiah Whitfield down. She had a hammer. She had 2 children. She had a promise made in a muddy field to a dead daughter. That would have to be enough. She thought about Bestemor Sigrid. She thought about the shepherd's hut on the ridge above Gudbrandsdalen. She thought about her grandmother's small hard hand pressing hers against the warm wall. Women build houses with patience. Ingrid opened her eyes. She did not have 2 weeks, but she had tonight, and she had tomorrow, and that was still more than most women had. Astrid came home from school with a bruise under her eye, not a big one, just a small purple half-moon on the cheekbone. Ingrid saw it as soon as her daughter walked up the hill. She set down the wool. She waited. Astrid did not cry. She climbed the 2 steps into the wagon. She set down her books. She sat down on the crate. She untied her boots. She lined them up neatly by the door the way her mother had taught her. Then she looked up. More Iris Callahan says you are a witch. Prudence Callahan's daughter. Of course. Because I live in a wagon. Because you talk to wool. She says her mother told her that you talk to wool like it is people. Ingrid almost laughed. She did not. What did you say to her? I told her wool listens better than she does. Ingrid's breath caught. And then she hit you. Yes. With her hand. Yes. On the face. Yes. Ingrid sat down on the crate opposite her daughter. She reached out. She touched the bruise. Astrid did not flinch. Astrid, did you hit her back? The girl looked up. Something in her eyes that was not 11 years old anymore. No. Why not? Because you always say we do not fight the ones who are already losing. Ingrid held her daughter's face in her hands. She kissed the bruise. She did not cry. Not in front of Astrid. She wiped her thumb across the bruise, and she smiled at her daughter, and she said the only true thing she could think of. Your father would be proud of you. Astrid's chin trembled. Just once. Then she nodded. She stood. She picked up her books. She went to help her mother pack wool. Lars came home the next day with a black eye and a split lip and both fists still curled. He was 7, and someone had called his mother a name that he did not have the words to answer with anything but his fists. Ingrid cleaned his lip with warm water. She held ice from the creek against his eye. She did not scold him. Which boy? Tommy Callahan. What did he say? Lars did not answer. Lars, what did he say? The boy's small jaw set. He said Papa left because he did not want us. The room went very quiet. The stove hissed. The wind pushed at the door. Ingrid put down the cloth. She sat on the floor in front of her son. She folded herself very small to be face to face with him. Lars, look at me. He looked. His eyes were his father's, blue like the fjord. Your papa did not leave because he did not want us. How do you know? Because I know. How? She almost told him then. About the Bible, about the flyleaf, about the words in his father's careful English. She did not. Lars was 7. Lars was not ready for a dead father who had loved him. Lars was still trying to survive a dead father, who might not have. She would tell him, one day, when his hands stopped curling into fists, "Because your papa was a good man, Lars. And good men do not leave because they do not want their children. Good men leave because something takes them." What took Papa? The snow. The snow took him. Yes. Lars looked at his hands. Then I hate the snow. Ingrid pulled him against her chest. So do I, my love. But we are building a house to keep the snow out. Yes, we are. So we are winning. She held him tighter. Yes, Lars. We are winning. Delphine Doyle came up the hill 3 days later. She was young. 23. Maybe 24. She had married the blacksmith's son when she was 19, and she had lost 2 babies in her body before this one was born alive. The baby was 2 months old. The baby's name was Rose. Delphine had walked up the hill in the cold, with the baby wrapped in a shawl against her chest. Her cheeks were red. Her eyes were red. She stopped at the edge of Ingrid's clearing. "Mrs. Halvorsen, I am sorry to come without invitation." "Come. I do not want to trouble you." "Come, Delphine." The young woman climbed the last of the hill. She stood in the doorway of the wagon. She looked at the walls packed tight with wool. She looked at the small stove. She looked at the felt around the door frame. She began to cry, not loud crying, the other kind. The kind that leaks out of you before you know it has started. Ingrid stood up. She took the young mother by the elbow. She sat her down on the crate. She took the baby from her arms. She held the baby against her own shoulder. Rose was warm. Rose was small. Rose was breathing. Ingrid closed her eyes for a second. Then she opened them. "Tell me." Delphine wiped her nose on her sleeve. "My house is cold, Mrs. Halvorsen. My husband is at the forge all day. He comes home at night. He builds up the fire. But by morning the walls have ice on them again. And Rose coughs at night." She could not finish. Ingrid rocked the baby gently. "How old is Rose?" 2 months. "How old was she when the coughing started?" 3 weeks. Ingrid was quiet for a long moment. She had been that woman. She had rocked a baby in a cold house. She had listened to a small chest rattle in the dark. She had wrapped her child in every blanket she owned, and it had not been enough. She looked at Delphine. She saw herself. "I will show you." "What?" "Everything." For the next 4 days, Delphine came up the hill. She brought Rose. She brought a lunch pail. She brought a notebook and a stub of pencil. Ingrid taught her. Ingrid taught her how to card raw wool with a comb, how to pack it into the spaces between the wall boards, how to seal a doorway with strips of felt, how to place a stove so its warmth would settle into iron panels that would give the heat back slowly through the long cold hours of the night. She taught her how to dry meat, how to salt fish, how to build a small stone cellar that would keep root vegetables from freezing. Delphine wrote everything down. She wrote until her fingers were stiff from the cold. Then she went home to her husband, and she showed him her notes, and she said, "We are going to do this." Her husband, a big quiet man named Samuel, looked at her notes. He read them twice. He nodded. Yes. They began the next morning. The first snow fell on a Thursday. It was not a storm. It was a warning. Fat wet flakes drifting down from a low gray sky. They melted when they hit the ground, but they stayed on the fence posts and the branches and the roofs. Ingrid stood in the doorway and watched them come down. She had done the walls. She had done the door. She had done the ceiling. She had put the iron panels in place along the interior. The little stove was set. The pipe was through the roof. The cellar was ready. She was ready. Almost. She still needed to fit the last piece of felt along the base of the door. She still needed to seal one small gap near the corner of the roof. She still needed to teach Astrid how to bank the stove so it would burn slow all night. Small things. Small things that were the whole difference between warm and dead. She turned back inside. She got to work. That night, someone knocked at the door. It was not a knock. Not really. It was more like a scratching. The sound a person makes when their hands are too cold to close into a fist. Ingrid opened the door. Delphine stood there. She was not wearing a coat. She had run up the hill in only her house dress. Her hair was loose. Her feet were bare in her boots. Her face was the color of new paper. She was holding Rose. Rose was not moving. Ingrid did not ask. She reached for the baby. Delphine let her take her. Rose was still warm, but there was no rise, no fall, no small breath moving against Ingrid's hand. Ingrid held the baby against her chest. She listened for a long time. She had listened this way before. She knew the difference. She looked at Delphine. Delphine already knew. She had come anyway because there was nowhere else to go, and no one else who would understand. Ingrid put her arm around the young mother. She led her inside. She sat her down by the stove. She did not give the baby back. Not yet. Delphine could not hold her yet. Delphine would hold her later all night, and no one would take her away, but not this moment. This moment, Ingrid held Rose so Delphine could breathe. Astrid was awake in the corner. She saw. She did not make a sound. She crawled off the pallet. She came to the stove. She sat next to Delphine. She took the young woman's cold hand in her small warm one. Lars slept. Small mercies. The stove crackled. Delphine did not cry yet. That would come later. Ingrid rocked the baby. She whispered something in Norwegian. It was an old song. Bestemor Sigrid had sung it to her. She had sung it to Solveig. She had never expected to sing it to another woman's dead child. She sang it anyway, softly, just for Rose. The next morning they buried the baby. The ground was not yet fully frozen. Samuel dug the small grave himself at dawn, before the neighbors were up. Delphine wrapped Rose in the blanket her own mother had made for her when she was a baby. Ingrid brought a piece of the felt she had cut for the doorway. She laid it over the top of the small bundle. So she will be warm. Delphine nodded. She could not speak. The pastor came. Elias Brandt. His breath made small clouds in the cold. He read a psalm. He said a few words. He did not preach. He knew better than to preach at a grave that small. Ingrid stood beside Delphine and held her arm. When it was done, the men shoveled the dirt in. Ingrid stayed until the last spadeful. Then she turned to Delphine. She spoke very quietly. There will be no more. No more what? No more babies in this valley. Not from the cold. Not this winter. Not while I am on this hill. Delphine looked at her. She did not answer. She did not have to. She just took Ingrid's hand and held it against her wet cheek for a long moment. And Ingrid, who had promised her dead daughter one thing, quietly made a second promise to someone else's dead daughter. She worked twice as hard after that. She almost did not stop. She almost did not sleep. Astrid had to bring her tea and set it in her hand and stand there until she drank it. Lars had to remind her to eat. The gap at the corner of the roof. Sealed. The felt at the base of the door. Fitted. The iron panels. Adjusted. The stovepipe. Reinforced. The cellar. Locked. The meat. Counted. Recounted. Enough for 6 months if they were careful. They were ready. They just did not know how ready. She almost broke on the 12th day. It was a small thing. A stupid thing. Her needle snapped. She had been sewing the last edge of the door felt for the 3rd time that morning. Her eyes were burning. Her hands were shaking. She had not slept properly in a week. The needle snapped. She sat on the floor of the wagon and looked at the broken pieces in her palm. Then she began to cry. Really cry. The kind of crying she had not done since Solveig. The kind that came up from her stomach and shook her ribs and made no sense at all because it was over a needle. She sat on the floor with her face in her hands, and she cried until her breath ran out. Astrid came in from outside. The girl saw her mother on the floor. She did not panic. She did not run for help. She did not cry too. She just walked over. She sat down on the floor beside her mother. She put her small hand on her mother's back. She spoke in Norwegian, the old language, the language her father had sung to her in, the language her grandmother had died in. More bestemor vil være stolt av degree. Mother, grandmother would be proud of you. Ingrid lifted her face out of her hands. She looked at her daughter. Astrid's eyes were dry. Astrid's mouth was set. Ingrid pulled her daughter into her arms. She held her the way she had not been able to hold Solveig. Astrid let her. For a long time they did not speak. Then Ingrid whispered, "Astrid, you are the best thing I have ever done." Astrid did not answer, but she pressed her face into her mother's shoulder. And that was enough. The knock came at midnight. It was not the small scratching of Delphine's cold hands. This was a fist, heavy, frantic, the kind of knock a person uses when they have run out of dignity and only fear is left. Ingrid was already awake. She had been mending the last of Lars's shirts by the stove. She stood. She went to the door. She opened it. Cordelia Whitfield stood on the step. Cordelia, Josiah's wife, the woman who had laughed the loudest from her horse, the woman who had called her honey in the general store. Cordelia was not wearing a hat. Her hair was down. Her coat was buttoned wrong. Her breath was coming in short white bursts in the cold. She was holding a child. A boy, 7 years old. Micah Whitfield, Cordelia's oldest son. The one who looked like Josiah. He was not moving properly. His head lolled against his mother's shoulder. His face was flushed. His lips were the wrong color. His breath was rattling. Ingrid had heard that rattle before. In Solveig's chest. The winter she died. Cordelia looked at Ingrid. Her face was destroyed. She was not the woman from the horse. She was not the woman from the general store. She was a mother. Just a mother. Nothing else was left. "Mrs. Halvorsen, please, my boy. The doctor cannot reach us. The road is closed. Please." The wind pushed through the open doorway. Cold rushed into the wagon. Ingrid did not move. For 1 second, one long second, she stood in the doorway, and she looked at the woman who had made her daughter cry. The woman whose son had put a black eye on Lars. The woman who had laughed at her from a horse. 1 second. Then she saw the boy's face. She saw Solveig. She stepped back. She opened the door wide. "Bring him in." The door closed. The latch settled with its quiet thump. The wind stayed outside where it belonged. Inside the wagon, the small stove burned steadily. Astrid was already up, already reaching for a clean blanket. Lars was awake in the corner, eyes huge in the lamplight. Ingrid took Micah from Cordelia's arms. He was hot, too hot. She laid him on her own pallet by the stove. She turned to Cordelia. Cordelia was standing in the middle of the wagon. She was staring at the walls, at the wool, at the felt, at the small warm room she had mocked from horseback 6 weeks ago. Her hands were shaking. Ingrid poured her a cup of tea. Cordelia took it. She could not lift it to her mouth. Ingrid guided her to the crate. She sat her down. "Cordelia." The proud woman looked up. For the first time in her adult life, someone had used her Christian name without a title in front of it. She did not correct Ingrid. She just nodded. Ingrid knelt in front of her. She spoke softly. "He will live." Cordelia's face broke. "How do you know?" Ingrid did not answer that with words. She just took the other woman's hands in her own. Her wool-stained, wind-cracked, hammer-calloused hands. And she held them, 2 mothers, 1 stove, 1 dying boy, 1 long night ahead. Outside, the wind rose. The first real snow began to fall. And on the hill above the grasslands of eastern Washington, in a wagon that a dead man had bought for a wife, who would one day need it, the winter of 1884 finally began. Micah Whitfield burned for 3 days. 3 days. Ingrid did not sleep. Not really. She dozed sitting up against the wall by the stove, her hand on the boy's chest, feeling the rattle, feeling for the moment it might stop. It did not stop. She fed him spoonfuls of broth. She held cold cloths to his forehead. She talked to him in Norwegian, when the fever climbed, so high he began to speak in words that made no sense. She sang to him, the same old song she had sung to Rose. Cordelia sat on the crate the whole time. She did not eat. She did not sleep. She did not speak. She just watched. She watched the widow she had mocked. She watched the wool she had laughed at. She watched the small iron stove that was doing what her own great stone hearth had failed to do. She watched her son not die. On the morning of the fourth day, Micah opened his eyes. Astrid was sitting cross-legged on the pallet beside the boy. She had been reading to him, quietly, from her father's Bible. The boy blinked. His lips moved. Bread. Just one word. Astrid froze. Then she looked up. More. Ingrid was already moving. She knelt beside the pallet. She put her hand on Micah's forehead. Cool. For the first time in 3 days. Cool. She turned to Cordelia. He is asking for bread. Cordelia stared. For a long moment, she did not understand the words. Then she did. She made a sound. Not a word. Not a cry. Something in between. The sound a person makes when a thing they were sure was gone comes back. She stumbled off the crate. She fell on her knees beside the pallet. She grabbed her son's small hand. She pressed her forehead against it. She began to sob. Ingrid stood up. She went to the stove. She cut a piece of bread. She warmed it. She spread it with butter. She brought it back. Micah ate. Slowly. Small bites. His mother holding his head up so he could swallow. He finished the whole piece. He asked for more. Then he closed his eyes and fell into a real sleep. Cordelia stayed on her knees. She stayed there for a long time. Then she turned. Her face wet. Her hair a mess. The Sunday hat. The pearls, the pride. All of it stripped off her like an old coat. She began to lower herself further. She was going to kneel to Ingrid. Ingrid saw it. She moved fast. She caught Cordelia by the elbows. Before her forehead could touch the floor, she lifted her. She held her up. No. Please. Please. Mrs. Halvorsen. Please let me. No, Cordelia. I have to. You do not. You saved him. You. After all I. Cordelia. Please. Ingrid held her tighter. She looked into the other woman's eyes. Do not kneel to me. Ever. Cordelia's face crumpled. But you saved my boy. Ingrid held her steady. We are both mothers, Cordelia. Silence. The stove hissed. Micah slept. Cordelia nodded. She could not speak, but she nodded. Ingrid pulled her into an embrace. 2 women. One had laughed. The other had opened the door anyway. They stood like that in the middle of the wagon for a long time. Neither one of them was the same woman who had walked through that door. Micah went home on the 6th day. He was thin. He was tired. But he was walking. He was talking. Cordelia stood in the doorway before she left. She looked at Ingrid. She looked at the small pile of coins in her own hand. She had brought them. She had meant to pay. She understood before she said a word that money would be an insult. She put the coins back in her pocket. I will bring wool. Every week. Until the snow melts. My best wool. My cleanest wool. I will bring it up this hill myself. Ingrid smiled. A small tired smile. That would be a kindness. Cordelia nodded. She turned to go. She stopped in the doorway. She turned back once. Ingrid. The first name again. Yes. I am sorry. 2 words. That was all. She walked down the hill, with her son's small hand in hers. Ingrid closed the door. Astrid was staring at her mother. More. That was Mrs. Whitfield. The one who told everyone you were. Yes. Astrid was quiet for a moment. Then, slowly, she smiled. The first real smile Ingrid had seen on her daughter's face in 6 months. Papa would have liked that. Ingrid pressed her hand against her mouth. Yes, he would have. A week passed. A week of quiet work. Cordelia sent wool up the hill twice, tied to the saddle of the Whitfield stable boy. Delphine came every day to help pack it. Word had begun to travel. through the valley, quiet at first, the way news travels between women, before it reaches the men. Ingrid finished the last of the walls. Astrid finished the last of the felt. Lars filled the last row of stones in the cellar. The bread of the 7th day was baked, before the storm came. Ingrid felt it in her bones, before she saw it in the sky. The old ache in her left knee. The one that had told Bestemor Sigrid a storm was coming for 60 years, before it told Ingrid the same thing. She looked north. The horizon was a wall, not clouds. A wall, gray on the bottom, black on the top, moving slow, moving certain, the way a wall moves that will move whether you are ready for it or not. She turned to Astrid. Bring in the wood, all of it. To Lars. Water, every bucket. Fill them. Bring them inside. He ran. Ingrid went to the cellar. She checked the door. She checked the seal. She locked it. She went back to the wagon. She checked the stove. She checked the pipe. She checked the door felt. She checked the corners of the roof. She checked everything twice. Then she stood in the doorway one last time, and she looked at the wall coming down from the north. She whispered, "Come on then." She closed the door. The latch settled. The thump, the wind, on the other side of the wood, began to whisper, then to hiss, then to howl. The storm lasted 3 days. Not the kind of storm that people remember for a week. The kind of storm that becomes a landmark in time. The kind that old men in feed stores talk about for 40 years afterward. The winter of '84. The 3-day blow. The temperature dropped to 30 below on the second night. The wind reached speeds that men in the valley had never seen. Fence posts snapped. Barns collapsed. The valley suffered. Inside the wagon, Astrid read to Lars from the Bible. The little boy sat with his back against one of the iron panels. He said it felt like leaning against a warm cat. Ingrid made stew. She rationed the wood. She rationed the food. The stove burned slow. Not hot. Slow. The iron panels drank the heat and gave it back through the long hours. The wool in the walls held. The felt around the door held. The wind pushed and could not get in. The wagon held. On the second night, Ingrid stood by the small window she had cut into the door. She looked out. She could not see 3 feet. She thought of Solveig. She said her daughter's name out loud. Just once. Solveig, I kept the promise. The stove crackled behind her. The children breathed in their sleep. She had to check the sheep. She should not have. She knew she should not have. The storm was too much. But there were only 12 sheep. 12. And she had bought them with the last of Eric's money. She wrapped her face. She wrapped her hands. She tied a rope from the door of the wagon to her waist. She pulled the felt tighter. She checked the lantern. Astrid was awake. More. I will be back. How long? Not long. Ingrid knelt in front of her daughter. She pressed her forehead against her forehead. I will be back. Astrid nodded. Ingrid opened the door. The cold hit her like a hammer. She was gone into the white. She was gone for an hour and 11 minutes. Astrid counted every minute. The girl sat by the stove, with her hand on Lars's back. Lars slept. Astrid did not sleep. Astrid stared at the door. She did not cry. She whispered to the door. Come back. Come back. Come back. At 1 hour and 11 minutes, the latch turned. The door opened. Ingrid fell inside. She was covered in ice. Her eyelashes were white. Her hands would not close. But she was inside. Astrid did not scream. Astrid did not cry. Astrid closed the door behind her mother. Astrid guided her mother to the stove. Astrid unwrapped the frozen scarf from her mother's face. She unlaced the frozen boots. She rubbed the frozen hands between her own small warm ones. Ingrid sat on the crate. The warmth came back to her slowly, in waves, each wave a knife. She looked at the shelf beside the stove. The mason jar of lamb stew, steam, still coming from under the lid. Warm, still warm. After an hour outside in 30 below wind, Ingrid began to laugh. The kind of laugh a woman laughs when she has just risked her life and won. Astrid handed her the jar. Ingrid held it in her hands. She felt the heat through the glass. She whispered, "Bestemor, you were right." Astrid smiled. Bestemor was right. Ingrid pulled her daughter into her arms. Outside, the wind pushed at the door. The door did not move. The knock came at midnight. Not the small scratch of Delphine. Not the frantic fist of Cordelia. This knock was slow, weak. The knock of a man who was almost too far gone to knock at all. Ingrid was on her feet before the second knock. She opened the door. A man stood in the snow. His beard was ice. His shoulders were white. His hands hung at his sides because they could no longer bend. His eyes were the eyes of a man who had walked in the wrong direction for a very long time. Ingrid did not wait. "Come." She pulled him inside. She closed the door. The thump. The world outside vanished. The man stood in the middle of the wagon. He did not move. He was too stunned to move. His body did not understand what had just happened. It had been in a blizzard. Now it was somewhere else. He looked around the wagon. Slowly. His eyes moved over the wool-packed walls, the felted door, the iron panels, the small crackling stove. He looked at Ingrid. He tried to speak. "How?" Just the one word. Ingrid guided him to the crate. "Sit." He sat. Astrid was already pouring hot broth into a cup. The man took the cup with both hands. He could not hold it steady. Astrid held it with him. He drank. He closed his eyes. He drank again. Then he began to shake. Not from cold. From something else. From the shock of being alive. Ingrid brought him a blanket. She wrapped it around his shoulders. The blanket had been Eric's. She had not used it in 3 years. Tonight she used it. The man took a shaking breath. Then, slowly, he did something no man had done in that wagon before. He unbuttoned his coat. He took it off. He hung it on the peg by the door the way a man hangs his coat in his own kitchen. He turned back to Ingrid. His voice was cracked. His eyes were wet, but he was smiling. "Ma'am, it is warmer in here than my own house was in the middle of last July." Ingrid did not smile. Not yet. She just nodded. "Sit by the stove. Drink." He drank. He sat. He lived. His name was Ezra Garrett. He was a freight driver, moving supplies up from Spokane before the roads closed. His wagon had lost an axle a mile down the ridge. He had walked in the wrong direction for 2 hours before he saw the small light in the wagon on the hill. He was 38 years old. He had a wife in Spokane. He had 2 children. He had, he said, made his peace with dying about 20 minutes before he saw the light. He talked slowly. His body still remembered the cold. Astrid brought him more broth. Ingrid sat on the other crate and let the stranger talk. Sometimes the fastest way to bring a man back from the edge of death was to let him tell you why he had almost died. Ezra told her about the axle, about the horse he had cut loose to give it a chance, about the choice he had made to walk instead of stay with the wagon. Then he stopped talking. He was looking at the shelf above the stove, at the small black Bible resting there. His face changed. Very slowly, very carefully, he set down his cup. He stood. He walked to the shelf. He picked up the Bible. His hand was still shaking. Not from cold anymore. He opened the cover. He read the flyleaf. He did not speak for a long time. When he finally turned back to Ingrid, his face was the color of the snow he had just walked through. "Ma'am, how did you come to have this book?" Ingrid stood very slowly. Ezra swallowed. "Ma'am, please, this handwriting, this name, I need to know." Ingrid's hand was on the back of the crate. Her knuckles were white. "That book belonged to my husband." Ezra closed his eyes. He held the Bible against his chest. He made a sound like a man being hit. Oh no, ma'am." Ingrid took one step forward. Her voice was not her voice anymore. "You knew him?" Ezra could not answer. "Mr. Garrett, you knew my husband." Ezra sat down on the crate. He put his face in his hands. He nodded. He talked for a long time. Ingrid did not interrupt. Astrid put Lars back to sleep. She sat beside her mother. She held her mother's hand. She did not let go. Ezra Garrett told them what he knew. He had met Ingrid Halvorsen in a mining camp in Montana Territory. 2 winters ago. Ezra had been running supplies to the camp for the winter, and had taken a room in the same boarding house, where Eric was staying. Eric had been coughing. He had been thin. He had been teaching the local carpenters how to pack wool into the walls of their cabins. He had been dying. He had been dying, and he had known it, and he had spent his last 2 years teaching every family who would listen how to survive the winter. He had saved, Ezra thought, at least 15 families. Maybe more. He had never spoken of a wife. Not for a long time. Then, one night, just before the end, he had asked Ezra to sit with him. He had given Ezra a folded piece of paper. He had told Ezra that if Ezra ever went to eastern Washington, if he ever passed through a certain valley, if he ever met a Norwegian widow named Ingrid Halvorsen, he was to give her the letter. He was to tell her Eric was sorry. Eric had died on the 3rd night after that conversation. He had died in his sleep, peaceful. Ezra had been in the next room. Ezra had taken the letter. He had put it in his coat pocket. He had meant to keep it safe. The letter had been lost. He had lost it somewhere between the camp and Spokane. He did not know how. One day it was there. The next it was not. He had spent 2 years looking for a Norwegian widow named Halvorsen in every town he passed through. He had never found her. Until tonight. Until his axle broke. Until he walked in the wrong direction. Until he saw the light on the hill. Ezra finished speaking. He was crying. Ingrid was not crying. Ingrid was sitting very still, with her daughter's hand in hers, and she was hearing a story she had needed to hear for 3 years. Eric had not left them. Eric had been lost in the blizzard. Eric had been found. Sick, broken, slowly dying. Eric had not come home, because he had not wanted her to watch him die. Eric had spent his last 2 years teaching strangers how to save their families from what had almost killed him. Eric had loved her every day of it. Ingrid stood up. She walked to the stove. She poured Ezra another cup of broth. She sat back down. She took a long, slow breath. Mr. Garrett, he is not sorry. Ezra looked up. Ma'am? Ingrid held the Bible in her lap. She smiled. A small, tired smile. A smile Ezra Garrett would remember for the rest of his life. He is not sorry. Tell him. If some part of him is listening, tell him he is not sorry. He did what he was supposed to do. She looked at the wall of her wagon. She touched the wool packed tight between the boards. He taught them. I taught them. Now they will teach their daughters. That is how it works. She looked at Astrid. Astrid was staring at her, with tears in her steady eyes. That is how it always worked, Astrid. It is not a thing one person invents. It is a river. Your grandmother taught your father. Your father taught the men in Montana. Now I teach the women in this valley. And one day, Astrid, one day you will teach your daughter. Astrid nodded. The tears did not fall. She would not let them. Ezra Garrett stayed for 2 days. The storm did not stop for 2 days. He could not have left if he had tried. On the second morning, another knock came at the door. 6 people had climbed the hill in the storm. A whole family from the valley. A father, a mother, 4 children. Their cabin had lost its roof in the night. Ingrid opened the door. She let them in. She fed them. By the 3rd morning, the storm began to break. 2 more travelers made it up the hill. Pastor Elias Brandt arrived on a borrowed horse, carrying 2 loaves of bread and a jar of preserves. There were now 12 people in the wagon. The pastor looked around. He looked at the widow standing by the stove, ladling stew into bowls. He looked at the children sleeping in a pile on the pallet. He looked at the freight driver reading Eric's Bible in the corner. He smiled. He said very quietly, "An ark." Ingrid looked up. "Pastor, an ark, Mrs. Halvorsen. That is what you built." Ingrid smiled. She went back to ladling. The knock on the 4th morning was different again. This one was not weak, not frantic, not desperate. This one was hesitant. Ingrid opened the door. Josiah Whitfield stood there. His hat was in his hands. His face was drawn. His eyes were red. He was not the man who had come to evict her. He was a man who had walked through 6-foot drifts to reach a door he did not know he had the right to knock on. Mrs. Halvorsen, my wife, Cordelia. She is in labor, 2 weeks early. The midwife cannot come. The road is closed. Our house is cold. I have burned every stick of wood we have, and I cannot get it warm enough. Cordelia is bleeding. I do not know what to do. Mrs. Halvorsen, please. He was crying. Josiah Whitfield, the man who owned most of what a person could see from the church steeple. He was crying on the widow's step. Ingrid did not think. She reached for her coat. Astrid, watch them, all of them. Keep the stove going. Keep the door closed. Astrid nodded. Ingrid grabbed her small canvas bag, the one that held Bestemor Sigrid's tools, the scissors, the clean cloths, the old bottle of camphor. She stepped out into the cold. She looked at Josiah. Let us go. They ran down the hill together. The Whitfield house was massive. 2 stories, 6 rooms, a great stone chimney. It was freezing. Ingrid understood immediately why Cordelia had lost the fire. It was too big, too grand, too full of holes a wealthy man could not see, because wealthy men do not think about wool between boards. Cordelia was in the bedroom. She was pale. She was sweating. She saw Ingrid in the doorway. Her face broke. You came. Of course I came. I did not know if you would. Ingrid went to the bed. She took Cordelia's hand. I always come. The next 12 hours were long. Ingrid worked. She sent Josiah for hot water, for clean cloths, for every blanket in the house. She built up the fire in the bedroom fireplace. She sealed the bedroom door with a rolled-up rug at the bottom. She turned the huge cold bedroom into a small warm room. She sat with Cordelia. She held her hand. 3 in the morning the baby came. A girl. Small. Pink. Perfect. Crying with a strong loud cry that filled the whole big house. Josiah stood in the doorway. He was weeping. Cordelia was weeping. Ingrid wrapped the baby in the warmest blanket. She laid her on her mother's chest. Cordelia looked down at her daughter. She looked up at Ingrid. Her voice was a whisper. Ingrid, what was her name? Ingrid froze. Whose name? Your daughter. The one who... Ingrid could not answer. Cordelia held her baby against her chest, and she looked at the widow, who had saved her son, and now her daughter, and she waited. Ingrid closed her eyes. Solveig. She had not said the name out loud to another adult in 18 months. Cordelia nodded. She looked down at her baby. She looked up. Then this is Solveig. Ingrid opened her eyes. Cordelia. No, you do not have to. I want to. But she should have your name. Or your mother's. Or... Ingrid, I want my daughter to carry your daughter's name, so that every time I say it, I remember what a mother is. The baby cried. Cordelia looked down. Hello, Solveig. Ingrid pressed her hand to her mouth. The tears came. They came the way they had come, when she read Eric's flyleaf. Slow. One at a time. Josiah stepped closer. He put his hand on Ingrid's shoulder. Just his hand. Nothing else. But it was enough. Spring came. The snow melted. The valley thawed. The road opened. The word had already spread by then. Ezra Garrett had gone home to Spokane and told everyone who would listen. The family who had lost their roof had told everyone in their church. Delphine Doyle, who had lost Rose, had taught 6 other young mothers the things Ingrid had taught her. Cordelia Whitfield had done more than anyone. She had put on her Sunday hat. She had gone to every woman in the valley. She had said the same 3 words. Learn from Ingrid. That was enough. By April, women were coming up the hill every day. Ingrid taught them all. She taught them how to pack wool, how to seal doors, how to smoke fish, how to line a cellar with river stones. She taught them the old song. She taught them the old prayer. She taught them what Bestemor Sigrid had taught her. Women build houses with patience. She taught them the truth she had learned in that wagon. The one about the door. The one that mattered most. A door has two purposes. Keeps the wrong things out, and it opens for the right things. A door that only closes is not a door. It is a wall. Learn to know the difference. Josiah Whitfield came up the hill one afternoon in late May. He was carrying a rolled paper. Ingrid met him outside. Josiah stopped at the edge of the clearing. He took off his hat. Mrs. Halvorsen. Mr. Whitfield. He held out the rolled paper. This is the deed. To this hill. Ingrid did not move. I do not want your land, Mr. Whitfield. It is not my land, ma'am. He set the paper on the low stone wall between them. He looked at her. It is yours, and it was always yours. You saved my son. You saved my wife. You saved my daughter. My family owes you a debt we cannot pay. But we can at least stop pretending to own the ground you saved us on. He nodded once. He walked back down the hill. Ingrid did not open the deed. Not that day. But she picked it up. She carried it inside. She placed it on the shelf next to Eric's Bible. 2 pieces of paper. One from a dead man who had loved her. One from a living man who had learned what love was. That evening, she stood in the doorway of the wagon. The sun was going down over the western hills. The grass was green again. The children were running below her on the slope, their hair bright in the last light. Astrid tall and strong. Lars fast and laughing. Ingrid held Eric's Bible against her chest. She spoke very softly, in Norwegian, so no one but the wind would hear. Tack, Eric. Jeg Forster knew. Thank you, Eric. I understand now. She turned. She stepped inside. She closed the door. The latch settled. The thump. Outside, the wind moved across the ridge, looking for a way in. It did not find one. It never did. Many years later, a young woman stands in a warm wagon on the same hill. She has her grandmother's hair, her grandmother's steady hands, her grandmother's eyes. She is packing raw wool into the walls of her own small home. Her daughter, for years old, stands on a stool beside her. Small fingers pushing the wool into the smallest cracks. On the shelf above the stove, a small black Bible. Next to it, a photograph in a wooden frame. A woman with silver hair and steady eyes. She is smiling. The young mother turns to her daughter. She speaks softly in Norwegian. Little one, feel the wall. The child presses her small hand against the wool. It is warm. Yes. Where is the fire? The young mother smiles. She has one tooth missing on the top. It makes her smile look like a secret. There is no fire, little one. But it is warm. Yes. How? The mother kneels down. She takes her daughter's small hand in her own. She presses it flat against the wall. She holds it there. Men build houses with fire, little one. The child waits. Women build houses with patience. And the wagon holds, as it has always held, as it always will. If you have stayed with this story to the end, thank you. Ingrid Halvorsen never wrote a book. She never gave a speech. She never asked to be remembered. But her story leaves us with 3 things worth carrying. The first is this. You are stronger than you know. Ingrid had no husband. She had no money. She had no help. She had a hammer, 2 children, and a promise she had made to a daughter she could not save. And with those 3 things she saved a whole valley. When life takes everything from a woman, what is left is often more than she was ever told. The second is this. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It is choosing. Ingrid had every right to close the door on Cordelia Whitfield that midnight. Every right. Cordelia had mocked her, insulted her, hurt her children. But when Cordelia came with a dying boy in her arms, Ingrid did not remember the insult. She remembered that they were both mothers, that one choice changed both of their lives, and every life in that valley after them. And the third is this. Nothing we know is truly ours. The knowledge that saved those children did not belong to Ingrid. It came from her grandmother in Norway. It was carried across an ocean by her husband. It passed through her hands to the women of one small valley in Washington. And one day it passed to her daughter and then to her granddaughter. What we learn from those who loved us is meant to be given away. That is how the warmth stays alive after we are gone. If Ingrid's story spoke to you, if it reminded you of a mother, or a grandmother, or a woman you once knew, please leave a comment below. Share the name of the woman you thought of while listening. Someone else may need to hear her story too. And if you have your own quiet hill, your own hard winter, your own door, that no one else believes will hold, remember this. Men build houses with fire. Women build houses with patience. And the wind is still, to this day, looking for a way in. It has not found one yet.